What's up, world? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Happy to be your host. Do all the things like, share, subscribe, support the platform however you like. Again, thanks to patrons and channel members who are getting to see this first, and those who are seeing this later. Thanks and welcome to you, but maybe consider an adjustment to those life choices. That said, I think I have a very fun way of engaging with some of you, at least. What for me has become an increasingly fun way of learning about the physical universe, some debates in mostly Western philosophy, and an engagement of atheists against theists in the atheist debates community. And I was watching a recent exchange, saw this clip that I'm going to share a little bit of with you, and it reminded me of another unfortunate area of necessary interest, which is in some sort of engagement with the reverse hashtag community, the backwards hashtag community, specifically ADOS. Around here, of course, we do SODA, Solidarity of Dispersed or Diaspora Africans. They, of course, focus on American descendants of slaves. But this fascinating overlap, which involves, as you'll see here, immigration, the very right-wing, white supremacist, conservative Center for Immigration Studies, and very retrograde, reactionary, ill-informed politics. So I'll show you a little bit of this recent exchange on a channel called The Line, featuring Matt Dillahunty, who is among one of the more popular figures in the atheist community, and his colleague here, the Godless Engineer, and a call that they are taking from a theist, white, nativist critic of immigration and immigrants. And then I'll show you a very new study about the ADOS community and the overlap that is unfortunately somewhat comical. And I will just preface it also to say, to preempt at least some of the criticism I know that comes with this, that if they get to have as the basis of their argument the very white supremacist settler colonial Center for Immigration Studies and the people and politics they represent, then why can't I lean on a couple of well-meaning and good liberal white atheist allies? All right, so here we go. The gentleman to, I guess, our left facing the screen, the bald one in glasses, is Matt Dillahunty. Again, one of the more famous. He's debated Jordan Peterson. He used to work with the magician James Randi. He is a magician himself, and was at one point studying to be a pastor, and then became a critic, and has for the last 20 plus years been doing this kind of work. And his colleague here in the hat is the Godless Engineer, who is in fact a mythicist, who has gone in, and he and Matt don't agree on this, but that is, Godless Engineer has gone into the world of mythicism, which is admittedly largely where I find myself moved by at least the argument and the evolving evidence that suggests that Jesus never even existed and is largely a figment of mythology attached to pre-existing oral histories. But that's just a little bit of background. They are in the middle of a call that we will pick up here just a little bit so we can hear some of the humor and around the debate. Where it's being picked up here is that the theist caller is arguing the standard white supremacist line, the ill-informed line about immigrants and their impact on the economy and what they are and the claim that how much they're draining from the economy. I'm not going to get into the details around that. Maybe we'll come back and talk about that another time, but suffice it to say that the claim that immigrants are coming here and destroying the economy and hurting people, this will come up actually a little bit later, that are taking jobs from black or white workers is just mythological, but part of the white supremacist settler colonial capitalist mythological narrative to pit people against one another and forever prevent people from raising the question about, well, who is doing the hiring and who owns the economy and who is setting the policy that is creating situations economically and otherwise where people would want to feel it or feel it necessary to come here? Who is setting the policy and the arrangements for their transportation so-called legally or not, and then again, of course, doing the hiring and most of the benefit and benefiting the most from that labor, instead of getting into that, which would force folks to target a white ruling elite. It's much more easy to pick on those in similar levels of struggle. But okay, enough of the preamble. Let's get into pick up where this conversation is and have a little bit of fun.
Since you would rather wipe your ass with the Constitution and not provide all peoples inside the United States with due process, we could just admit that you don't care about the Constitution. But we could talk about numbers if you wanted to. I'm an engineer, so I love numbers. How much in taxes have undocumented immigrants contributed? Usually annually.
Well, they pay billions in income tax, but they don't pay a lot of other taxes.
$11 billion in taxes annually, which is not, I don't know what you mean by that, because it's $11 billion in taxes, both federal and state and city taxes. So it's like taxes at all levels. They contribute $11 billion to it. What do you think, where do you think they're being a drain on the American economy?
All right. And I got to add here that prior to this part of the discussion, the caller has been arguing that one of the ways to determine whether the federal government is justified in deporting people, regardless of any form of due process, is their ability to speak the English language. And this was what he offered up previously as a method or a standard by which one could be judged to be here legally and worthy of not being deported, even again without any sort of due process. So it's important to add that little bit of again context before I move on here. All right.
National Academy's estimate of immigrants' net fiscal impact by education level, we estimate that the lifetime fiscal drain for each illegal immigrant is about $68,000. Although this estimate comes with some caveats, so I don't know every detail, but that's what they estimate.
Some caveats. Yeah. Oh, that's okay. That's college level English right there. Caveats. Okay. You're a bad motherfucker there. He's got some caveats for you.
So, okay. So I can, but at the end of the day, it's $68,000.
All right. So obviously he can't pronounce the word caveat and doesn't even understand what he's reading, but in a moment, we're going to get to what it is he's actually reading, and this is where some of that overlap I mentioned at the beginning comes into play. But I couldn't help but I just thought that was perfect. Again, after saying how important it was to him that the English language be spoken correctly, even acknowledging, as Matt does at one point, that caveat technically is brought into the English language from, I don't know, French or something. But the point is that if all right, it's pretty clear, yeah.
Net drain per illegal immigrant, including the taxes they pay.
And where? So you're just saying that.
I can read specifics.
Yeah. If you can give me specifics, like what specifically are the undocumented people's like getting? Because like undocumented people can't like get tax returns or returns on their taxes or anything like that. They essentially work and they pay into the system, and they're unable to get any kind of money out of the system. Undocumented people usually can't like get Medicaid or anything like that.
Yeah, and as I pointed out just the other day, they also contribute to the GDP by just through consumption, and Coca-Cola, and as we pointed out, and other companies are noting a drop in sales, and local businesses that obviously depend on their consumption suffer as well. So this idea that this is just a one-way drain on the resources of this country is absurd. And of course, when people start to look at, well, what percentage of the federal budget goes to social services and the so-called safety net, it's a paltry handful of a percentage or a few percentage points. And then which they don't get into here, but if you start to look at all the studies over the years, I remember in the 90s, it was being reported that at the time, about $600 billion a year is lost to the tax base because the richest people in the country put their money overseas and don't find ways to not pay taxes. The biggest companies don't pay taxes, find loopholes, and so on and so forth. So if you really want to talk about who's draining the economy, it would be them, not these so-called illegal immigrants. But
there's a lot of different ways in which they do pay taxes, like state and city taxes are paid whenever they purchase items. And then federal taxes, they some undocumented people, they what they'll do is they'll get like a business, they'll start a business, which it's actually one of the largest. Let's see, according to my research here, many undocumented immigrants are business owners who create jobs and contribute to the economy. They create businesses, they use the 10 for the business in order to pay their taxes.
And unlike anything being sold through the black capitalist form of this mythology, those small businesses are not being said to be what is going to bring parity and revolutionary change to those communities. It's those, they're basically forms of survival programs and remittance package plans back to their home countries. So it's not this idea that, again, the small business world is the avenue to freedom is ridiculous.
Please go ahead.
In addition to consuming welfare, illegal immigration makes significant use of public education. It's estimated that illegal immigrants in public schools created $68.1 billion in costs in 2019. Which is more than they pay into in federal income tax, more than they pay into in Social Security and Medicaid, more than they pay into it with income tax, I believe.
Should we do the math on how much Tim contributes and uses?
I mean, Tim, undocumented persons also use roads. Are you going to somehow figure up a monetary value for that and also attribute that to them?
Probably.
I get it. Undocumented kids go to school and you really fucking hate it when undocumented little Mexicans go to school. I get it. I like how you didn't deny that.
What do you, the numbers altogether say that there's a fiscal drain on the tax base. How is that fair to American people?
All right, but here we go. This is all right. All fun aside, link to the whole thing is in the show description if you want to follow up and see more about this. But this is where, for me, sort of my ears perked up again when I was watching this originally and thought of this overlap that I mentioned again at the beginning. Here we go.
I'm wondering where did you say that you're getting this information from? That you're reading off of your script there?
I'm reading this from the, hold on a second.
Your anti-immigrant script.
The House Budgetary Committee, I believe. This is a title.
Journal of
The Impact of Illegal Immigration on Social Services by the Director of Research for the Center of Immigration Studies.
You're a great researcher.
Message!
All right. So I remembered Center for Immigration Studies. It's been around for a long time, very right-wing conservative white nationalist organization that reemerged sort of on my radar during the backs and forth with the ADOS community, and in learning how their argument and then their direct political ties overlap with the Center for Immigration Studies. And part of what I've been arguing is that just like with black capitalism and buying power and otherwise, these are very white conservative ideas, values, narratives, perspectives, ideologies carried through, distilled through, wrapped in blackness, discussion of the black experience, just in recontextualized as being part of a black liberation struggle. And we see the same thing happening with ADOS, where, as I'll show you in a minute with this new report or a new study, that as I've been arguing for a long time, they're carrying this very white conservative argument, again, wrapped in the language of black freedom. So as Dillahunty and the Godless Engineer did. I just quickly went and revisited the claims in this case from the Southern Poverty Law Center. Again, I understand that there's a lot of contradiction here. I'm not arguing that the SPLC is the gold standard for judging the politics of any group. I just thought it was interesting that from their perspective, this anti-immigration organization, the Center for Immigration Studies, founded by John Tanton in 1985 in Washington, D.C., figures somewhat prominently in the concerns of folks like the Southern Poverty Law Center and others who note the very white supremacist, nativist language, xenophobic language, some called white nationalist and anti-Semitic language, that has led the Southern Poverty Law Center to label CIS as an anti-immigrant hate group. And I'll link to this so you can read it more yourself. But the argument here is that the Center for Immigration Studies is wrong about all the facts and issues. They misrepresent the criminality and the impact on the U.S. economy, as we just heard in that discussion, of immigrants. And of course, they take attention away from the white ruling elite and the capitalists class and the settler colonial white nationalists who actually benefit the most from the labor exploitation and the infighting among oppressed and variously colonized and oppressed groups of people. It says here, more recently, CIS has been in the headlines for its connections to former Trump administration advisor Stephen Miller, a man who in college collaborated with white nationalist Richard Spencer to bring another white nationalist, Peter Brimelow, onto campus for a debate on immigration. So, and then you can just read, you could just read all of the kinds of language about, immigrants coming here, doing this, doing that, taking advantage of this, advantage of that. They in their white nationalism revisited papers, so you can get the full history here. But the point is, again, from their perspective, this is they will not replace us people. This is the white America. America is a white country only type of thing. And the only immigrants that are allowed are the Europeans that came here to conquer and colonize and enslave and set up this country in the first place. Everybody else is late and unwelcome. So in a quick search, just to re-jog my memory on this, my methodology is limited here. So I just Googled Center for Immigration Studies and ADOS. And one of the first things that came up was this paper that came out just this year in the European Journal of American Studies. I looked into it a little bit. It seems like this is in sort of it says open edition journal. I don't get the idea that this is a highly, in terms of academic standards, I don't get the idea that this is a peer-reviewed journal or something that is particularly rigorous in determining what is accepted for publication. So I'm acknowledging that, and I'm also acknowledging that it feeds my own biased view of the reverse hashtag community and their politics, and supports the experience that I've had as well. So just want to be clear about the biases, and again, the link is in the show description. You can review the study on your own and vet it as you like, and vet my own argument or analysis of it as you like as well. All right, that said, it's published by Annetta Dybska, The ADOS Movement, Policing the Boundaries of Lineage. Again, not reading the entire thing. I'll leave that to you if you like, but to go through just a little bit of it. What I found fascinating here is some of the overlap in, as I said, the discussion on the Atheist Debates channel and our own, or my own, engagement with the reverse hashtag. But as the author here says, using the American descendants of slavery ADOS movement as a case study, I will show that foregrounding lineage to build political power behind the reparations for slavery movement creates intra-racial resentment, which weakens racialized unity and solidarity. So that is the baseline thesis of this paper, and I agree with it. That foregrounding lineage to build political power behind reparations for slavery creates intra-racial resentment and weakens racialized unity and solidarity. the tactic of wedding one's entire project for repair to an appeal to the very people who benefit from the history and have benefited from the history of creating that damage is, I think, just tactically flawed. The strategy in talking about the strategy, and I think the author here does a fair job of summarizing the history of this movement and its politics. But however, the strategy comes at the cost of normalizing, that is, as I just said, wedding oneself to the settler colony. This strategy comes at the cost of normalizing anger and hostility as modes of political engagement. ADOS leaders and followers heavily rely on xenophobic attitudes and anti-immigrant rhetoric to oppose the perceived loss of economic opportunity, social status, and political power vis-a-vis migrant groups. So again, I agree with this argument. And to the extent that they're correct, to the extent that anyone is using anti-immigrant rhetoric to make the point that their own conditions should be improved or be addressed first or primarily, or that the interest, in this case of black people in the United States, are being hampered by immigrants, so-called legal or otherwise, is missing all of the points about the how the economy works, the maldistribution of the wealth created, and suggests that we should be pitting ourselves against these relatively powerless and resourceless groups of people to achieve something better for Black America, as opposed to just saying redistribute the wealth that only the ruling elite seem to be sitting on, and then we be good. Let's start there. Let's start. Okay. The paper here talks about, as we pointed out a couple of times, that this is a version of, ADOS is a black version of the white replacement theory. And what I like about what this paper does is it adds the bit of context about the demographic shifts over the last 6 decades, talking about the amounts of people who have come here, and the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965, which is noted here to be a landmark legislation that allows immigrants from Asia, Africa, and Latin America to come in greater numbers, and also replace the national origin quotas initially set at 2% in the 1890 census with hemispheric quotas that allow ultimately for more people from other parts of the world to come to this country. Between 1965 and 2024, 72 million immigrants came to the United States, mostly from Latin America, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean, and Sub-Saharan Africa. But, as we pointed out here a number of times, as sociologist Todd Hamilton observes, the demographic changes within American society have shifted the black-white color line to the black-non-black binary, reflecting the rising social and political importance of non-white ethno-racial groups such as Latin American and Asian immigrants vis-a-vis groups racialized as black. We'll come back to his point, but he also, that is Hamilton, also points out that, as we've noted a number of times, the class differences of those allowed and welcomed into this country over this time period. So in other words, this nativist approach taken up by ADOS, this white supremacist nativist approach taken up by ADOS to justify claims for repair, justifiable claims. Black people in the United States deserve more than the United States is capable of giving. The Western world is not capable of the repair that is actually owed. But the tactic of saying we're good with the, and it gets worse, but the tactic of saying we're good with the United States and we built this country and give us our due and let's stop giving stuff to these immigrants is a flawed one that creates diaspora hostilities and resets the color line from black against white to black against non-black. So as I'm putting it, the black-white unity that ADOS seeks can be solidified. In other words, it's a very conservative integrationist approach that is the ADOS one. The ADOS anti-immigrant attitude can be explained as a consequence of the changing demographics and economic competition. Native-born, working-class, and working-poor Black Americans find themselves competing for low-skilled and low-wage jobs with immigrant workers, a situation that often results in the former's economic displacement. And that this helps fuel anti-immigrant resentment. But again, what what gets lost in this is that point. How is a black worker displaced by a non-black worker? By the hiring choices of the white owners. And that should be the focus, not who they're hiring. It shouldn't be, hey, I'm on team boss. Don't hire them, hire me. It should be, yo, why don't you hire all of us? Or why don't we just take over ownership of what it is that is owned and we can all benefit? Then, of course, by extension, the public policy and the economic policy that drives all of the desire for migration to this country would start to wash up. And then you could take care of it that way if that's your preferred, if that's your preference. But this whole thing of let's attack them and blame them and hate on them. And again, I am not suggesting that all these black and brown people coming to this country care for or love black Americans. I'm not in some naive whatever. I am saying that whatever attitudes we have about one another are best addressed by dealing with those causing the hostilities, benefiting from the hostilities, as opposed to targeting one another. And especially, never mind tactically, analytically, it doesn't lead us anywhere. ADOS's adherence response to demographic shifts and changing economic conditions seems to support a version of replacement theory that holds that immigrants, especially those who arrived after 2000, are numerically replacing ADOS and diluting the group's economic and political power. All right. So up until the year 2000, Black America was chilling, doing well, had all the political and economic power and that could be desired. And then all these damn immigrants came here and messed it all up. That's the argument? That in 2000, we were on a trajectory to freedom. And then all these immigrants showed up and took all our jobs.
They took our jobs!
Having as its focus the impact of immigration on black Americans, it brought attention to the alleged conspiracy of political elites in an allusion made to the Democratic Party to displace U.S.-born black Americans and purportedly illegal brown people who were invading traditionally black neighborhoods and taking low-skilled industrial jobs traditionally held by black men. And to support this, this one of the bits of cited efforts here, because I skipped over this part of the methodology, I should say, that the author said that part of what they did here was review not only what has been printed on the ADOS website and other materials, but then review Yvette Carnell's show for its political content and its narrative content. And one of the points that we'll come back to, as I've pointed out, particularly in my exchange with Mark Lamont Hill, is that however they appear to in some of these interview spaces or in some of their written materials, the hostility that lies beneath only takes a moment to recognize. In other words, they present themselves with this discussion of, we're not hating and we're good with this and we're friendly with that and we don't have any problems with any, and then they get into their show, as this study points out, and they get all kinds of hostile and do all kinds of shady things, say all kinds of shady things, as I've experienced, as others have experienced. We talked about that. I'll link to some of that if folks want to follow up. But the point is, there's a difference between the propaganda and the actual content and behavior. But footnote 35 of this essay takes you to this video on the ADOS Advocacy Foundation YouTube channel. And you see here, they're on a panel with the Center for Immigration Studies. So this is who they're teamed up with. This is sort of the point I've been making all these years. This is who they want to build with. They don't want to build with those on their political left. They don't want to build with the pan-African black radical community. They don't want to build, with any progressive force. But they will sit with these folks in panel, and I'm going to speed it up a little bit, but we can hear a little bit of the argumentation here. And check out what is said here right at the beginning.
We've been touching on the issue, but a century ago or more, the top black leaders in the country were critical in different ways, but critical of immigration. Whether it was Booker T. Washington or Du Bois, who were pretty much diametrically opposed in every way you can imagine. Du Bois ended up as a communist, and Booker T. Washington was a self-help guy who, palled around with Teddy Roosevelt, and then Marcus Garvey, obviously. But they all agreed that large-scale immigration, and back then it was mainly legal, but it was still large-scale immigration was a problem.
They believed their eyes.
Right, exactly. They believe, sort of, what is it? It's a struggle to see what's in front of your nose or something like that. But there isn't really much.
So this is part of what I've been saying that they do. So we even see it here. What is all this reference to Garvey, Booker T, and Du Bois, and to use them? First of all, citations needed, please. where that their arguments were immigration to this country was going to harm the condition of Black Americans, and therefore an anti-immigration stance should be taken, especially when we're talking about Garvey and Du Bois, two of the largest, whether you want to call them pan-Africanists or African nationalists or whatever, but people who understood not only Garvey in particular coming from the diaspora, but they understood the importance of diaspora. Even Booker T, to a certain extent, understood the importance of diaspora as he pressed his version of concerns for Black America internationally. In other words, he went around the world, often at the behest of his white sponsors, to do what he thought was necessary to benefit Black people here. But this argument is, so they're already twisting but they can't not make references to these people, and in order to capture the unconscious desire for revolution among Black people in this country and around the world. In other words, you cannot fully disparage, and that's why the paper I'll come back to in a moment talks about, ADOS will make all the references to Malcolm and Dr. King, and in this case, they'll happily make reference to Garvey, or hear from the Center of Immigration Studies references to Du Bois, Garvey, and Booker T, but never with any actual desire to engage the arguments of those people. But
really much of anything like that today. And it's not just among Democratic leaders. Obviously, there are some Black Republicans who are critical of immigration, but even there really isn't the same level. In other words, there's nobody who makes even, I'm not picking on him, but Tim Scott's a pretty high profile, is talked about as potentially vice presidential candidate. Maybe he says something about, well, we need more border control or something, but that's just an easy thing for politicians to say. Why aren't there more Black leaders, prominent people, no insult to anybody here, but I'm talking about the top people in the country who are willing to talk about immigration? The issue is just sitting there on the ground waiting for somebody to pick up.
Because everybody knows, who understands and has any actual care for Black people, that immigration is not the cause of of any Black suffering in this country. The issue of joblessness has nothing to do, or underpayment, or access to investment for your business. It has nothing to do with the immigration population coming over here. So that's why nobody's talking about it, other than those who want to only side with the most reactionary and conservative elements of this country, with some false hope that they will reap some reparative justice reward. What is probably more likely is, never mind the claimed goals, but it's a much safer and rewarding, lucrative lane to run in that is a conservative one than would be a more progressive one. It's good for the algorithm, ad revenue, support from Center for Immigration Studies and other reactionary foundations, white and others, to do your thing. But what will actually benefit Black people? No, nothing's coming from this argument lane of argumentation.
To pick it up.
Well, the establishment. Can I answer?
Let's go ahead, Donna, and then you.
I'll say this. Unfortunately, most of the Black political leaders that have a platform are actually politicians. Now, I'm from a nonprofit. We don't endorse anyone, but I think that they go along with whatever the prevailing issue that will keep them.
So somebody let me know if they see Donna Jackson or anyone from the ADOS Advocacy Foundation paneling in support of even liberal Democratic Party political spaces. Again, you can claim you don't have any support or overt support for a politician or political party as a nonprofit. You have to make that argument, but it's clear just who they are willing to engage and whose arguments they're willing to pick up, what team they're on.
In their positions, they're not they don't have boots on the ground in the communities, hearing like we do from the people that think this is important. The other thing is, you'll see prominent community leaders on the local level talking about the destruction of illegal immigrants. What's problematic is they're not given a platform. When you have a mainstream media whose primary concern is making sure narratives are consistent with whatever the agenda is, they're not going to give you that platform. In fact, if you notice, and I don't endorse any candidate one way or the other, if you notice Eric Adams, all of a sudden he's under investigation, and many of the members of his team, because he's gotten out of step with what the narrative needs to be. So, but there are people who want to speak up. I have many of them. We just have to have people who are brave enough to be able to allow their voices to be heard. And so that is the biggest issue. It's the platform, not the people in the community who are saying this, because you go to New York, in the Bronx, you go to New York City, you go to Chicago, you go to Atlanta. I can tell you, you can go to Detroit, and those people are saying the same thing. We want jobs. We can't get those jobs because we have meatpacking plants that will only hire illegal.
Right.
They took our jobs.
And you heard her say it there herself, and then falsely apply the focus. If a meatpacking plant is only hiring so-called illegals, whose fault is that? Why is it the so-called illegal immigrant, the powerless, illegal, the politically, economically powerless, and so-called illegal immigrant somehow has more authority and power over the situation than the owner of the meatpacking plant? This is exactly the point. And is very similar to my argument around buying power and black capitalism. These conservative arguments encourage black people to exit the labor movement and labor struggle in some false consciousness, misled desire or belief that exiting the labor movement, disassociating from any other so-called segment of society, wedding oneself strictly to the settler state and the capitalist class of ownership, that this is the best pathway. It is just patently absurd. It is the preferred and encouraged and imposed narrative that is being succumbed to here, wrapped in the language of a concern for black people, black workers, black employment. But if you're genuinely interested in the condition of the black worker and black unemployment or black employment opportunities, target the hiring, target those who own and control and benefit from all of the maldistribution. Stop targeting the powerless. It's a completely phony argument and approach. But as this article says here, as this study says here, finally, the replacement theory offers ADOS followers an easy explanation for the perceived neglect and political marginalization of the African-American electorate by the Democratic Party. Now, the frame of this study does suggest that the Democratic Party is falsely represented as neglecting and marginalizing black voters. And that is would itself be a flaw of this study. So again, it's not that the reverse hashtag community has no basis for an argument. Black people in this country do deserve all forms of repair. Black people in this country are marginalized and neglected by the Democratic Party and taken advantage of. But again, you don't see ADOS sitting with those of us advocating for leftward breaks with the electoral system and other forms of engaging electoral politics. You see them engaging with the most right-wing white supremacist conservatives because replacement theory offers them an easy explanation for what is happening. And instead of, and it's funny because Matt Dillahunty in that very clip talks about with the caller, his unwillingness to engage the difficulty of struggle and finding a solution, and his preferred simple solution of just blaming it on the immigrants. And that's exactly what's happening here. So it's not that there's no case or argument or righteousness undergirding the concern for black people in the United States. It's that concern is being met with the most conservative white settler colonial analysis. And that's where the reverse hashtag community has it exactly backwards. The study here talks about the ADOS rejection of flat blackness, a term apparently Yvette Carnell started to coin and use that basically says stop flattening blackness and start to parse out, as they said here, the differences between the Black American and diaspora experiences. In 2023, ADOS Advocacy Foundation submitted a proposal to the White House Office of Management and Budget to disaggregate ADOS as a separate ethno-racial group from the general Black or African-American statistical and census category. Because from their perspective, we don't come from Africa. We have no connection to Africa. We don't want to test our DNA and find our tribe. As it says here, rather, the ADOS community see the American South as the birthplace of a distinctive African-American native culture, ethnogenesis, and themselves as carriers of an American brand of identity, a unique group whose ancestors built with their toil and sacrifice. Whose ancestors built America with their toil and sacrifice. They manifest their loyalty only to the United States. Quote, we as ADOS are respectful of what America has done to us, not only of what we have endured, but the pathway we opened up to them, black migrants, to come here. Respectful of what America has done to us. That's a wild argument. Positioning themselves as foundational builders of the nation alongside early settler colonial groups, ADOS adherents make a claim on their unique share of rights and privileges, stating, quote, we have fought for freedom and endured hardships. We are proud of the struggle. We built this country, and for what we are owed a debt, and for that we are owed a debt by the federal government. We are Americans, black Americans descended from slavery. So they acknowledge, as I've argued, like they acknowledge their ethnogenesis is right here in the American South in slavery. Nothing before that has anything to do with anything, had no impact on anything, carried over in no way to the contemporary experience, and all these other arguments among Pan-Africans about the cultural continuity and cultural memory and Africanisms and so on and so on. All of that is irrelevant because we are respectful of what America has done to us. It's a very Theodore Herzl Zionist kind of logic as well, thinking about that letter he wrote Cecil Rhodes. We don't want to mess up the empire. We are settler colonial just like you. And I'm sure we'll get to in a minute when Yvette Carnell is defending Beyonce, that it would stand to reason that she also defended Beyonce's defense of the Buffalo Soldier. Hey, we even got out of slavery and helped suppress the indigenous population. We are as settler colonial as all of your projects, and therefore we want our cut of the pie. It's diabolical. ADOS followers disagree with Pan-Africanists on the strategies for fighting for reparations. Although the latter are predominantly U.S.-born black Americans, Carnell makes frequent offensive comments aiming to discredit their Pan-Africanist worldview altogether as, quote, opium for the black people that has not led to anything in terms of real political advancement, end quote. She dismisses the group as a small circle of incompetent reparations advocates lacking in skills to organize the grassroots. Now, again, you have a benefit in advocating for the grassroots when you are carrying the white supremacist settler logic that is happily distributed through all forms of media, algorithms, ad revenue, Center for Immigration Studies, and other right-wing conservative outlets and institutions that are supporting the effort. Of course, it's quote-unquote easier to organize the grassroots, especially when you're not asking them to abandon the imposed capitalist, black capitalist, nativist narratives that are encouraged. So sure, when Carnell lashes at Pan-Africanists for patronizing ADOS leaders and not respecting them enough to collaborate in their struggle for reparations, her bitterness and disappointment mask the fact that ADOS's rhetoric and uncompromising attitude does not invite race-based alliances. So she does that all the time. I said that thing with Mark Lamont Hill. Like she said, she presents like, hey, we're just trying to be friends. And then all the rhetoric is they ain't this and they ain't that and they stole this and don't do that and rapping MAGA this and rapping around the American flag and Pan-Africanists are incompetent and terrible and Morgan State should fire Jared Ball and all types of stuff. Like, oh, but why won't they work with us? Compared to U.S.-born black Americans, descendant of enslaved people, Todd G. Hamilton explains, black migrants are indeed better educated and have more cultural capital, yet they are not fully representative of the societies they come from. This is, again, the point we've been calling out for a long time. You keep judging, you keep wanting to judge the very class-biased elite that often come to this country and benefit in ways that black Americans here can't benefit. And then when we, even in the Pan-African community, are critical of those class differences and those neo-colonial differences, the argument is erased by the ADOS community to just simply say all of them come over here and just take advantage of what we've given them in terms of opportunity and the criticism again can't be, or the analysis can't come from any sort of progressive or left or internationalist argument. But my point is, one of my points at least, is that the pan-Africanist radical internationalist analysis does account for the fact that these class divisions are encouraged, these neo-colonial divisions are encouraged, and we struggle with those Africans to overcome that. And we need to continue to, because it's only going to continue to get worse in that regard. But again, reverting back to the settler colonial elite as a solution is not. For all these reasons, Hamilton insists their achievements should not be measured against those of the general black population, but against those of black internal migrants only. So again, that's the point. You can't say, oh, these Nigerians came over here and they're outpacing black Americans, or even, as was said recently of the Donut King, you can't come here. The Cambodians can even come here and with their shared cultural unity do things that black people in this country can't. No. All of that is nonsense. As it says here, to get to the U.S., that is these so-called legal migrants from the African diaspora, undergo a selective admissions process which favors the most ambitious, risk-taking, motivated individuals who are willing to make sacrifices. Therefore, their perception of opportunities in the host country can vary depending on the economic conditions of their countries of origin, as well as the historical context that shapes their aspirations. For all of these reasons, Hamilton insists their achievements should not be measured against those of general black population, but against those of the black internal migrants. But ADOS supporters don't engage that nuance. They're not encouraged to engage that nuance. Christina M. Greer's concept of elevated minority status helps us understand some of the negative sentiments that black immigrants hold against native black Americans and vice versa. And this is part of the point. This is part of the nuance. This is not that those of us in the Pan-African community are not in denial of these differences, but there's a way to analyze it in a way that doesn't set us in lockstep with the people creating this problem, and encourages us to build with those most suffering by these problems, and organizing movements and ideas and efforts that would make all of these differences and distinctions moot. So Greer looks into this. The elevated status of most migrants who come here in terms of the African diaspora and the so-called legal immigration process, they are, from an attitudinal perspective, in opposition to most of the people in their own country, never mind most of the people in the condition of black people here in this country. And in neither case are they coming from a perspective, or rarely are they coming from a perspective that would allow them some radical analysis of what caused the conditions in their own country, or what caused their elevated potential coming here. Nyambi Michelle Carter explains that a lot of this anti-immigration stance is in response to the anti-black stance that some of these immigrants bring with them as part of this elevated minority status, or as Carter describes, a contemporary version of secondary marginalization. The term comes from the behavior of ethnic Europeans in the late 19th century and early 20th century, who themselves, members of racialized immigrant groups, marginalized black Americans to gain social status and assimilate into racial whiteness. So the African diaspora, often coming from that class elevated position, elevated minority status position, engage in that same process. So it's not to say that black Americans don't suffer that against, vis-a-vis African immigrants, but that again is to say the answer to this problem is not going to come from the Center for Immigration Studies and the settler colonial white supremacist capitalist ruling elite that ADOS want to seem only willing to team up with. ADOS followers and black immigrants agree in one respect, though. Blackness as a statistical and political category clusters together diverse groups based on phenotypic similarities and gives short shrift to ethnic distinctions, varied collective experiences, and allegiances these groups retain within the African diaspora. But Carnell finds the phrase people of color contentious as well. She argues that black voters and African and Caribbean descent and brown voters are no longer a unified minority bloc that traditionally gravitated towards the Democratic Party. So again, similarly, we over here have a similar criticism of people of color, but it's more along the lines of Sylvia Wynter saying that humanity shouldn't be judged based on white man and the rest of us as people of color. So it's not to say that we shouldn't find and appreciate distinction. It is to say that ADOS, on the one hand, wants to reject the people of color category while not recognizing that it is of itself a label imposed by white supremacists on the majority of the people of the world. So to team up with that same white supremacist group in an attempt to claim some sort of reparations for this distinct and specific black population is, again, tactically, never mind analytically, ideologically, philosophically, flawed. I thought this was interesting too. According to Niambi Michelle Carter in her 2019 book, American While Black, African Americans, Immigration and Limits of Citizenship, introduces the term conflicted nativism to grasp the particular nature of the native black Americans' attitude towards immigration. Her empirical research findings show that black Americans descendant of formerly enslaved people are proud to be American, and the more national pride they have, the less anti-immigrant sentiment they harbor. So this is funny to me because according to Carter's argument and what is alleged in her empirical research here, ADOS, despite their claims to being proud Americans, willing to wrap themselves in the flag and MAGA hats and everything, are actually less proud, have less national American pride than the majority of black Americans descended from formerly enslaved people, who often exhibit more national pride accompanying less anti-immigrant sentiment. When asked about their feelings for immigrant groups, they have the most warmth for African immigrants in the general spirit of black diasporic solidarity and less for European, Asian, or Latinx immigrants. Yet when they feel immigration affects their communities and hinders black progress, Carter explains members of these communities may resort to nativist rhetoric, but not the brand that involves xenophobia or chauvinism. Neither a defense of American cultural purity nor a call for government policies to cleanse the nation of the foreign element. Their nativism is fueled by conflicted feelings about U.S.-born black American social status in American society. As Carter succinctly puts it, blacks use the issue of immigration as a way to articulate their feelings about the failures of the nation state to address their needs and incorporate them as full members of the citizenry. I theorize that black opinion on immigration, therefore, is mediated by their sensibility about their lack of belonging in the body politic. Immigration serves as a vehicle for grievances against the white supremacy that orders American society. So even in this respect, ADOS are demonstrating a lack of national pride vis-a-vis most black Americans and are therefore resorting to, again, a more reactionary conservative form of criticism of immigration instead of saying, yo, as Carter points out here, and as I was saying, if you're going to be critical of immigration, it should be to point out how black America still has issues needing to be addressed, not to turn this against the immigrant populations themselves. And then it becomes a vehicle for grievances against white supremacy, as opposed to what ADOS is doing and using it as using immigration as a vehicle to run towards white supremacy. Does the ADOS anti-immigration rhetoric fall under Carter's definition of conflicted nativism? ADOS leaders and followers are proud to be true Americans and subscribe to an exceptionalist vision of the nation's founding with their enslaved ancestors as the builders of the nation's wealth alongside the founding fathers. The archived ADOS Advocacy Foundation official web page offers a clear example of the movement's anti-immigrant rhetoric framed around the group's lineage and birthright to reparations. We need set-asides for American descendants of slavery, not minorities, a throwaway category which includes all groups except white men. The categorization has allowed Democrats to use programs like affirmative action as giveaways to all groups in exchange for votes. The bribery must end. Black immigrants should be barred from accessing affirmative action and other set-asides intended for ADOS, as should Asians, Latinos, white women, and other minority groups. But again, they only target Democrats. They don't target Republicans with the suggestion that Republicans, because they never advocate for anything left of the Democrats, with the suggestion that Republicans in the MAGA world will somehow do something specific for black people. And to get there, they want to take up the white supremacist attack on immigrants. So instead of going back to what Carter shows in her work, that and saying that the lack of what Democrats have actually given to black people should be challenged by encouraging more for all of us, or instead of calling them out for the fakery of using affirmative action to benefit white women, and therefore advocating for something more radical and redistributive. Their argument is, no, see, this is proof that the Democrats are terrible, and therefore we should team up with Republicans and the white right. The ADOS movement's motto, "We stand in the shoes of our ancestors," makes the connection between past and present, stressing that the harms of slavery in the post-Reconstruction era extended well into the mid-20th century. But I made a note to myself when I saw this line here, and given what was also said previously about the beginnings of ADOS in the American South. And it reminded me again of what we see in these atheist debates channels, for instance, around the theist criticism of evolution. And what scientists often point out is that, evolution is often misunderstood, particularly by the theist world and those who want to deny the science of evolution. And part of the argument is, well, how come we still see monkeys and we're here if we evolved from monkeys and stuff like that? And one of the things that they've pointed out that I've heard argued by atheists and scientists in these discussions, it seems similar to this point about the ancestry here. In other words, where for them do ancestors begin and end? So it says, when we stand here in the shoes of our ancestors. I said, so where does this ancestors piece begin and end? Because you can claim that it all starts in the American South, but like evolution, and like the science community will often make in terms of arguing in defense of evolution, there was no final Latin speaker in France any more than there was a last of a previous species with the new species children offspring. So my point is, when was the last African? In other words, there was no, the French language didn't evolve out of Latin where there was this immediate cutoff where you had this last Latin speaker and then the first French speaker. Any more than species evolution is, there's the last of this kind and then the first of it's much more complicated and overlapping and slow over a long form. So they're attempting, that is, ADOS is attempting to have this sharp cut in human history at the American South, slavery in the American South, to say that some brand new species was emerged. So that sort of, again, so I'm saying, when was the last African that became this first African American? Totally distinct, totally cut off and anew from the ancestors. When did these set of ancestors get that full break and fully cease to exhibit or involve or contain any African concept of the world, practice, belief, etc., and so forth? When was the last African? ADOS leaders communicate their political agenda and allegiance through visual rhetoric of their website, ADOSfoundation.org. The choice of photographs on this site underscores patriotic attachment to federal institutions, the U.S. Supreme Court building, the U.S. Capitol building, as well as reverence for national symbols, the Statue of Liberty, given to this country by immigrants, for immigrants, as an appreciation for migration, and the American flag and the ideals those institutions and symbols express: respect, justice, and law, encoded in the equal justice under the law inscription on the west pediment of the U.S. Supreme Court building, trust in democratic processes, and reverence for individual freedoms and rights. In terms of historical predecessors, the ADOS movement aligns itself with the civil rights movement and peaceful protest rather than the confrontational rhetoric of black nationalism or pan-africanism. With Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of America as a land of freedom, equal opportunities, and racial justice, e.g. the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, and the sharecropper Fannie Lou Hamer's fearless voting rights activism in Mississippi. So they'll do the same thing. We'll use King in this. And again, by the way, that 1963 speech, William Sullivan said, marked King as the greatest threat among Negroes for bringing them towards communism and in support of the 1959 Cuban Revolution. So it's the ignorant misrepresentation of even Dr. King and the civil rights movement is wild. Is wild. And again, Dr. King was not about peaceful protest. He was about nonviolent, direct action. So this blanket phrase of peaceful protest is itself inappropriate. But as the study here continues, ADOS adherents' self-presentation as true American citizens who cherish the ideals encoded in the founding documents and institutions that embody them is a far cry from their anti-immigrant rhetoric, which one might observe brings them ideologically closer to white nationalists. And this is where they talk a little bit about the distinction between what is said nicely in those PR campaign web pages and what they actually say on their show and how they actually engage the public. And it's talked about here in the context of a rising conservatism, the 2024 presidential election, where 24% of Black Americans, both native and foreign born, and 27% of Latinx people supported deportation of undocumented immigrants. Carnell vocally supports President Trump's challenge to the birthright citizenship guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. Now, again, this study doesn't say it, and I don't know well enough about their content and arguments, but my suspicion is that Carnell does not make the more appropriate argument that the 14th Amendment was not abused most by immigrants, but it was abused most by corporations in redefining themselves as citizens. And it's white corporations that took over the 14th Amendment and its claimed conferring of citizenship to Black people post-enslavement. So again, if the ADOS approach is I mean, could be described as kind of punkish, because you don't want to deal with the actual bully. You want to pick on the other people the bully is thrown against the lockers. You know, it's like you see the bully beating somebody up and they step to you, and instead of stepping to the bully, you're like, no, I'm gonna go beat up on them too, because you're gonna repair me. So I'm not gonna talk about what you did to the 14th Amendment. Let me. Yeah, I miss a lot of what ADOS says it does, but I thought this part was funny. The controversy over Beyonce's album Cowboy Carter is a case in point. Lost, we saw it. We've even talked about it on here and on Black Liberation Media that Beyonce wrapping herself in the flag and doing all that is liberal counterinsurgency. It's an abuse of representation and so on and so forth. But as it says here, Carnell used the media buzz around Beyonce as a pretext to target African immigrants as people with visas who quote got here yesterday telling you what you can and want to do. They come here and otherize you. We have a right to this flag. We have a right to this land. We've earned it. We have built it. So when other people were like, why is she out here raising this flag? And remember, Beyonce's audience is international. She happily reaps the benefit of their financial support. So if others from other parts of the world would say, why are you wrapping yourself in this flag that's abusive to us and abusive to the world, is supporting a genocide? Why are you doing all of that? Here comes Carnell saying, nah, Beyonce's ours. The flag is ours. If she wants to ride a horse and do all that, that's good. Because as she went on, Carnell spewed vitriol at African immigrants saying, we are Americans. Beyonce is American. You have no right to define us and tell us what flag ours is. Because apparently somebody said, why isn't she wearing red, black, and green flag? You came here only recently and you have no idea about our experience. We are not African. We are American. And then those of us who do have a Black American understanding of our experience in this country, who are critical of Beyonce and the flag, then we just get dismissed as retrograde, incompetent pan-Africanists. The antagonizing views and emotions communicated in Carnell's online show stand in sharp contrast to the ADOS movement's restrained and matter-of-fact tone on their official website. Those statements hardly express fear, prejudice, or distrust of immigrants that find release in the less formal setting of Carnell's weekly show. In talking about the H-1B visa program, ADOS targets all of that. teaming up with MAGA and supporters, and Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller, as we talked about with the Center of Immigration Studies, claiming that the program replaces American workers by giving jobs to underpaid foreign workers. Here, the ADOS hostility towards Indian professionals aligns with that of MAGA supporters. So again, if the goal is to get black people more access and availability for training and education and jobs, etc., that should be the goal. And that should be addressed to the people setting the policy and doing the hiring, not the people and the immigrants themselves. And certainly it should be done in league with more left-wing redistributive politics, not MAGA, Bannon, Miller type thinking. But Indians serve metonymically as stand-ins, not only for H-1B visa beneficiaries, but also for immigrant outsiders as a whole and for Kamala Harris in particular. So again, the very justifiable and righteous critique of the Democratic Party and Kamala Harris gets taken up by ADOS and turned into a very right-wing, reactionary approach. Again, never advocating for something left of the Democratic Party or some radical re-engagement with electoral politics among the black and other communities. They don't do that. They just go straight to MAGA. Same thing with Obama. They have there's a righteous and justifiable criticism of Barack Obama. I can't believe there's many more people more involved in that criticism than I've been over the years. But from a left, progressive, internationalist, Pan-African perspective, not one. So I do think there's legitimacy in calling out the fact that the first black this and black that at that level, in terms of president and vice presidential candidate, are black people from the diaspora and not black America. I pointed out for years the baggage of slavery line that white journalists used to run in 2007 and 2008 in terms of letting white voters know that Obama was safe to vote for because he didn't have the baggage of slavery. Been very critical of all of that. But again, from the perspective of that comes out of or is connected to a black radical tradition, not something akin to white reactionary politics. So in conclusion, the author says, I would conclude by first pointing to the fact that, as argued above, ADOS adherents have a legitimate claim when they say that black Americans descended to formerly enslaved people have been prevented from accumulating wealth by the capitalist system that exploited their ancestors as slaves, sharecroppers, and domestic workers in the past and continues to exploit them as a pool of underemployed labor in the present. I agree with that, except that I don't think that there's much overt criticism of the capitalist system in the ADOS community, as is said here, but that's the point. There is a legit problem here. There is a legit concern here. The problem is, of course, as I've been arguing in terms of buying power and black capitalism, the goal is to have us find our pathway out of this in the most white, right-wing, conservative, reactionary, settler, colonial, capitalist, violent, hostile ways, assuring we never get anywhere. It's to take the righteous concerns that we have and distill them safely through an ADOS backwards hashtag lens. All right, that's going to do it for this one. Thanks again, everybody. Peace, only if you're willing to fight for it, like Fred Hampton used to say, and I will catch you next time around here with more. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.